Good evening, everyone. It's been a long time. I have found a very interesting article on the ancestry and demography and descendants of Iron Age nomads of the Eurasian steppe. So we're going to look to the Scythian DNA, the Proto-Scythians, and East Eurasian and North Eurasian, actually West Eurasian haplogroups, the DNA. And this was an article published in 2017. I will also talk about my thoughts on this. So, I don't know how much this is going to last. It deals about millenniums before millenniums before the Common Era, that means BC. And so the Iron Age Scythians were living in the Eurasian steppe. And here it gives some demographic figures and numbers. But what I like to say here, they took some individuals and they looked at the mitochondrial DNA, and this was from the eastern and western parts of the Eurasian steppe. And it says here, the genomic interference reveals that the Scythians in the east and the west of the steppe, they were a mixture of the Yamnaya-related ancestry, it says here, and an East Asian component. But I have to say here that the Yamnaya were actually not an Indo-European speaking community. I strongly think that when they came out of Central Asia, they came from Central Asia, and they are actually, in my opinion, they are the remnants of the Yeniseian and Caucasian and the Ket speaking peoples, the nomadic tribes, the ancient nomadic tribes descendants. And they were actually, I think they were strongly speaking an old Yeniseic language mixed with Turkic in that region, and maybe some part of Mongolic. So they came to Europe not with an Indo-European language. The Yamnaya were most probably from the North Eurasian ancestry, the ancient North Eurasians, one part of the ancient North Eurasians. I will come to the ancient North Eurasians later, back later. And okay, it says here they mixed with the East Asian component. So These Yamnaya mixed with the East Asians, and this formed new groups. Okay. And what kind of groups? The steppe. I have to mention here Edward Weida. Edward Weida strongly thinks that the Yeniseian languages, they almost died out, and the only remnants for the old Yeniseian languages is the Cat people, a Siberian group of the Cat people. They still live in Siberia, in South Siberia, I guess. And these people, they most probably spoke the oldest nomadic, yes, they were hunter-gatherers, and around these hunter-gatherers, the only group, there were the pastoralists. The pastoralists are the Turkic people. They were Turks in Siberia. So the Yamnaya was not a pastoralist group. They were from the hunter-gatherers. That's what I think. And they most probably had the same descendant or the same origin from these Yeniseian and Caucasian originators, because the language they spoke was Caucasian and Yeniseian mixed. It is not an Indo-European language. That's why I think Indo-European, the language of Indo-European, has its roots in the mixture of Old Yeniseian and Old Turkic. That is, they have a mixture. Indo-European is the child of Old Yeniseian languages and Ural-Altaic. That's what I think after my research, especially after Edward Weida. I will also link the video where he talks about the languages, and that makes me think that Yeniseian, Old Yeniseian, Nadene, the Siberian languages, the East Asian, American Indian communities, and also the Caucasian people, they have a certain link together. They are related to each other. So this is seen in the Yamnaya speaking community. So the Yamnaya are definitely not an Indo-European speaker, group of speakers. So I have to continue. I have to turn back to the Scythians. So the introduction is here. During the first millennium BCE, nomadic people spread over the Eurasian steppe from the Altai Mountains, over the northern Black Sea, as far as the Carpathian Basin. So the classical Scythians, they lived in the North Pontic region, it says, and they are the most famous due to the early reports in the history of Herodotus. He wrote about the Scythians, and Greek and Persian historians of the first millennium BCE, they talk about the Massagets and the Sauromatians and the Sarmatians later, and the Saka. So the Saka, they are actually the Turkic group of the Scythians. They are the same. So we see classical Scythian monuments, etc., etc. I will not go into this because it is the style and the culture, basically. So I will actually dive into the roots of the Scythians and the people who were making up this culture again. And I have actually found the roots of the Yamnaya, and I will turn back to that. So the origin, it says here, is in Eurasia, of course, of the Scythian culture. They are here, this is important. The center of the Scythians is actually the Central Asian steppe. So in the center of the Scythians derived from Central Asia. So when we say Central Asia, it also has East Eurasian origins, especially Arshan in Tuva and the Kurgans there. So these are the earliest Scythian kurgans, it says. So I will skip this part, the animal style, etc. We can see still in Turkish culture the Scythian beliefs, like for example blood brotherhood, or the bows, how the bows were used, and horse riding was very important in the Turkish culture. Women rode horses, and still in Central Asia there are women still riding horses. So they actually, especially in Kazakhstan, they actually preserve this culture, this Scythian culture. So, and also if you look at our burials, they look like, the graves of the Turks, they look like mini kurgans. So here it says something about the Yenisei River. So the animal style characteristics, they are actually in the Yenisei River, right? I think I have to right, I hope you can see this part. Okay. So, okay, here we have the Yenisei River. And the early presence of the Scythians in the East, it says here. Okay, the animal style was found in the early Scythians, the Eastern Scythians. And okay, now what about the genetic studies? This is important. They studied the mitochondrial DNA in Central Asia, and they found that the gene flow was from the east to west, not from the west to east. This is the mistake that many scholars make, or many YouTube videos. They talk about the Scythians as Iranic people, as Persians, but actually they were vice versa. They spread from the east to the west, from East Eurasia to West Eurasia, because the gene flow occurred from East Eurasia to West Eurasia in the Bronze Age. So if you look at the Andronova culture and the Yamnaya culture, we see an admixture of East Asians. So you see here in the Yamnaya population, there are East Asians, and the Andronova culture, there are East Asians. So it is wrong to say that the Andronova culture and the Yamnaya culture were Indo-European, because they have an admixture of East Asians. This is wrong. It is wrong to say that the Indo-Europeans were the Yamnaya and the Andronova culture. The Yamnaya and the Andronova culture turns out to be an East Asian rooted culture. So, I'm continuing. They took the mitochondrial DNA of 96 individuals here. And of course, from the Scythian culture, associated with the Scythian culture, and they analyzed these individuals. They looked at the genomic data, and they found out that there were several Scythians. They looked at the initial Scythian period in the North Caucasus. They looked at the classical Scythians in the Don-Volga region, and they looked at the early Sarmatians in the Urals. So they analyzed samples from East Kazakhstan. It was around 1000 BC, and they looked at the Arshan sites to the Adibel culture in Tuva. So that was about the 7th century BC. And they took samples from the Tagar culture. So, it says here, the majority of the samples generated by this study from the literature date to the 4th and 3rd century BCE. So, they looked at the 4th century BCE samples. Okay, these were situated in the Kazakh, Russian, and Mongolian parts of the Altai Mountains. And they all were assigned these samples, these mitochondrial DNAs, they were assigned to the Pazaruk culture. And the human bodies, etc., they were very well preserved. Now, this is a typical Scythian. Okay. Now, I'm skipping the lifestyle and culture because I'm more interested in the roots of the Scythians, the origin, because the origin is misunderstood, and it is misinterpreted. It is done on purpose, most probably to wipe out cultures and to most probably to emphasize. Anyway, I'm skipping this. This is my own opinion. I will not give my opinions on this. I will just have the results of the studies and the real information that is true. That's what I want to give here. So they analyzed certain populations here, and they looked at the genetic relationship of Iron Age steppe nomads. So certain groups were analyzed, as I said, and they looked at 86 people here, all over Eurasia. So here we see the important steppe belt. Now, if you use your logic, if you look at the map, you will see that the steppe belt stretches from Mongolia, Khakassia, Lake Baikal, okay, a bit of Altai, towards Kazakhstan, the steppe belt, right? And the Caspian Sea, the Aral Sea, we have the Caucasus. Okay, so it's all on the same range. And then we have the Black Sea. So until Ukraine, of course, until Europe, the part of the Crimea, the Ukraine, and the Caucasus, and there it stops. And even East Europe, it takes also East Europe. So from one part from the east to the west. So this is the same culture. These are not different cultures. They are the same culture, the same people. So we have the Sarmatians here, we have the Scythian phase. It is introduced here. The Adibel culture. So they are the same culture, the Pazaruk culture, the Tagar culture, because one culture is the predecessor of the other culture. So you cannot separate the Tagar culture from the Scythian culture. They are the predecessors of the Scythian people. Here we see some samples. I will actually skip the samples because I would like to come... wait a minute. I would like to come to the result. Otherwise, it would take hours. So here, we have the genetic relationship and the origin of the Scythian groups. This is important. I hope you can see this. It says here, the Eastern sample group can be divided in 4 cultural subgroups. When we look at the mitochondrial DNA, there is no distance between the groups, it says. Okay. So the Scythians in the east, the Tagar culture, and these analyses were all made. So they derived from one single population, they say here. That's what I said. And it was expanding over the time period, etc., etc., it says. So it was one culture, one single population, stretching from the east to the west. The same steppe belt. Okay. I'm continuing. Since the genetic distance between the combined Scythian groups in the east versus those of the west were relatively low, we used ABC, they said, to further assess if the eastern and western Scythians might share a common origin. Of course they share a common origin. It is the ancient North Eurasians. this is what they share. The Eastern Scythians and the Western Scythians, they share the ancient North Eurasians. I mean, when we look at their DNA. So, I will come back to that. For these analyses, we included contemporary samples representative of genetic diversity of the extremes of Eurasia. According to our model selection algorithm, a multi-regional end model was provided, blah, blah, blah. So, okay, they took Western samples, they took Eastern samples, and they compared them. And what did they find out? They were all East Asian. That's what came out. And the East Asians, they are the descendants of the of the ancient North Eurasians. So this is the result. I will come back to that. So they had, as I said, they compared the Eastern and the Western Scythians and their DNA. Okay. Some scholars say the Eastern and Western Scythians, they were in contact. But here it says they arose independently. And they experienced significant population expansions, it says here, during the first millennium BCE. But it says here, there was a continuous gene flow between the Iron Age Scythian groups, and there was an asymmetrical gene flow from the Western to the Eastern groups, it says here, rather than the reverse. There was a gene flow. So if you have a look here, we have the Western Scythians, the multi-regional part, and here we have the Eastern Scythians, right? So they're explaining these all. So WEU is here the West Eurasians, and then the WS is the Western Scythians, the ES is the Eastern Scythian groups. The N is the Han. Even the Chinese were involved in the Scythians, the ancient Chinese. So this part is important, I think, because it includes the Andronovo culture. Because the populations across Central Asia during the Bronze Age are often archaeologically associated with the spread of the Andronovo culture, we used ABC to fit a sample of Middle Bronze Age nomadic groups from Western Siberia, most of them associated with the Andronovo culture, into the preferred demographic model of the origin of Scythians. Okay, it says here the western part of Siberia was associated with the Andronovo culture. And it also says the Central Asian groups were also associated with the Andronovo culture. So Central Asia and Western Siberia was actually the culture which served the Andronovo culture. And this part, Western Siberia and Central Asia, is the origin of the Scythians. That is the Proto-Turks. So, we have here 40 samples from the Andronovo culture in the West Siberian forest steppe, and 9 samples from the Krasnoyarsk region from the 2nd millennium BCE. So the results, they were taken, and this formed the Eastern Scythians. So the samples from the West Siberian forest steppe was taken, and the samples from the Krasnoyarsk region was taken, and it came out that they formed the Eastern Scythians. So there was, how was the genetic diversity and the ancestry of the Scythian groups? Here we have the haplogroups of the West, and we have the haplogroups of the East. Here you see them. I mean, of West Eurasia and East Eurasia. And we also see this in the Tagar culture and the early Sarmatians. Okay, it says here, very important. Using, anyway, what they used is not that important. We performed a principal component analysis of 777 present-day West Eurasians. So they took about 800 West Eurasian samples, and they projected the 8 newly reported Iron Age Scythian samples. And also, they took 167 other ancient samples from Europe, the Caucasus, and Siberia. Okay, so they took samples from West Eurasians, that is, from Europe, the Caucasus, and Siberia. And the 2 early Sarmatian samples from the West fell closely to an Iron Age sample from the Samara district. Okay, so the result was they were from the Samara district, and they were very close to the Yamnaya samples, to the Bronze Age Yamnaya samples from Samara and Kalmuk. So, okay, we have the Samara here, very important. And the eastern samples from Pazaruk and Aldebel, they were a part of a loose cluster from Central Asia. So shortly we can say then, the eastern samples from Pazaruk and Aldebel, they were close to Central Asia. They represented the groups of Central Asia. So here we have, of course, when we say Central Asia, the Okonevo, the Iron Age Russia, and the Karasuk culture and the parts. And then these samples contrast with earlier samples from the Eurasian steppe belonging to the Andronova, Sentashta, and Srubnaya groups, which overlap late Neolithic Bronze Age individuals from mainland Europe and are shifted downwards towards the early farmers of Europe and Anatolia. This means that the Eurasian steppe, the culture of the Eurasian steppe, belongs to the Andronova culture, the Sentashta culture, and the Shrubnaya culture. And the Sentashta, the Andronovo, and the Srubnaya, they are Proto-Scythian cultures. They are not an Indo-European culture. So I'm skipping these analyses. the important thing is here that there were some individuals, the ancient individuals show anyway, skipping this. Okay. The West Eurasian samples, they show a relationship in contemporary East Asian populations. Here we have it. West Eurasia, it says here, has East Asian DNA. We will come back to that later. So there were some thousands of individuals, modern individuals, taken, and they were compared with the ancient individuals, and it came out that the present-day West Eurasians and Eastern non-Africans, they had a mitochondrial haplogroup analysis. And the Eastern Scythians, says here, display nearly equal proportions of the mitochondrial lineages common in East and West Eurasia, whereas the Western Scythian groups, the frequency of lineages now common in East Eurasia is generally lower, even reaching 0, for example, in initial Scythian phase of the 8th, 6th century BC. Anyway, this is not that important. Here again, the chart is shown. I think we need, wait a minute, statistics. So the statistics here is important. So they used the statistics from the Han, the Mbuti, and the early hunter-gatherers and the Han-related ancestry. They compared these. And they used the results, etc. And they compared it with the Yamnaya. So the Iron Age Scythians, they stretched from Yamnaya to the Ami, and Ami is an East Asian ancestry. So, again, we have here the Yamnaya from Samara and the East Asian populations. Okay, and here it says, the Iron Age populations that can be modeled as mixtures of Yamnaya and East Eurasians are arrayed around this line and appear to be distinct from the main North-South European cline. So here we see it. That's not that important, actually. I want to come to the ancient North Eurasians. That's my point. Okay, so another thing that they did is they used statistics from Yamnaya, Samara, and Han to check whether a test population has intermediate allele frequencies between the Yamnaya, Samara, and Han. The statistics are significantly negative for all Scythians, demonstrating an admixture occurred. So all these communities, they mixed. That's fact. So an admixture analysis was made, and it talks about the individuals here, the ancient individuals. Now this part is important. All steppe populations have ancestry components that are maximized in European hunter-gatherers. So there were European hunter-gatherers, Caucasus hunter-gatherers from Georgia. So the Caucasus, most probably the belt, the steppe belt from Europe, was meant by the hunter-gatherers in blue. One subset of the steppe populations, this included the Srubnaya, Sintashta, and Andronovo culture, which was towards Kazakhstan, in the area of close to Kazakhstan. And they have an early farmer ancestry. So there was also a different subset, and it had an ancestry from another component, which was called the Nganasan people. These are Samoyedic people from North Siberia. So shortly, I'd like to say that Siberian people formed the Scythians from East Asia to west parts of Europe, the Caucasus. They were all Siberian people. The ancestry of the Scythians is Siberian. That means Yeniseian, Turkic, Mongolic, most probably Chinese as well, but in a very small number. And it says here, people were taken from Siberia and Central Asia. That's what I said now. I didn't read this, but it is actually logical that these people were used from these communities, Siberia and Central Asia. So also East Asian populations were taken, of course. And it says here, there was an admixture. Now we see this admixture here. Look at the admixture. These are the early Neolithic hunter-gatherer farmers. The hunter-gatherer farmers, the early Neolithic, this must be the Yeniseian descendants. Here we have them. And the Yamnaya is not the steppe population. The Yamnaya is actually the hunter-gatherer left people from the Yeniseian Siberian part. They mixed with Samara. I think Samara was a pastoralist group. Like Edward Weida said, pastoralists were the Turks. The pastoralists was the Afanasyevo culture, the Samara culture, the Andronovo culture, the Sintashta culture, and the other cultures. They were the pastoralists, and the area around Kazakhstan, they were all pastoralists. They were the Turks, the Proto-Turks, the pre-Turks. The Yamnaya, however, was the remnants of the Caucasus, the hunter-gatherer part, the ancient hunter-gatherers of the Yeniseian people, like the Ket people, most probably the Nadene North American people, because new DNA studies, they have shown that there is a little DNA evidence of American Indians and Europeans. So this means that the Yamnaya and the Caucasus, they had the DNA of the American Indians. So this means that they were actually hunter-gatherers, the Yamnaya. So So these were all pastoralists, the Samara, the Afanasyevo. It was them, the Sintashta and the Andronovo, and it was them who brought the horses to Europe. It was not vice versa, because the first samples of milking is the pastoralists, because the pastoralists, they know how to make use of the milk, make products of animals like cheese, milk, etc., etc. So animals were an important part of their lives. And here we have these admixtures, and you see here how Yamnaya mixes with Samara. So Samara, I think, was a Turkic-speaking part. They were the pastoralists. Afanasyevo and Kalmuk and the Andronovo, they were all pastoralists. And the Yamnaya, I think the Yamnaya is shown in blue, I'm not sure. Here you see how they, or vice versa, it might be green as well. Anyway, it says here, red arrows point to the Iron Age Scythian individuals. The early Neolithic linear band ceramic, Eastern hunter-gatherers, Eastern European hunter-gatherers. It doesn't show the color though. CHG, the Caucasus hunter-gatherers, CHG. So CHG must be the Yamnaya. So they must be shown in green here, most probably. So the Yamnaya are definitely a Yeniseian group. They are not Indo-European. And Yeniseians are Siberians. Yes. Well, I'm saying this because of Edward Weida. I came to the conclusion because of him, and I will add his video to my presentation. Very important person, very important person. He is my idol. He is my idol. I adore him. He and Barry Cunliffe, they are my number ones. So, modeling ancient steppe populations. Let's see here. I think this is an explanation of the admixtures that happened. We modeled steppe populations as mixtures of the early Bronze Age Yamnaya and the LBK farmers from Central Europe and East Asians. We applied the method of blah blah blah, which provides a statistical test for the number of streams of ancestry into a test population and the admixture groups, admixture proportions. In our application, we use 5 outgroups. Okay, they used 5 outgroups. Ust-Ishim, Kostenki, MA1, Papuan, and Onge. First, we calculated whether test and the Yamnaya from Samara could be descendant from a single stream of ancestry. In the next step, we included blah 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 farmers testing whether the Yamnaya from Samara and LBK farmers from Central Europe could be descendant from 2 streams of ancestry, in which case test could potentially be modeled as a mixture of the other 2 populations. The results, okay, the results are important. The results show that the Iron Age Scythians and the Yamnaya are not descendant from a single stream of ancestry. So they were not the descendants of one stream of ancestry. We therefore considered an alternative model in which we treat them as a mix of Yamnaya and the Han. So the Yamnaya, or the Scythians, are a mixture of the Yamnaya and the Chinese, the Eastern populations. So the Yamnaya are not Indo-European. The Yamnaya are, as I said, Siberian people. They are the Yeniseian remnants, the Caucasoids, but the Caucasoids are not Indo-European. They have come from Central Asia. They have come from the Yenisei Siberian part, because they speak a very, very close language, and there are some hypotheses of these languages, the Nadene Caucasian hypotheses, language hypothesis, and I also agree with that hypothesis. And most probably the Scythians, they spoke a common language, which was Old Yeniseic, Old Turkic, and a little bit of Mongolic and Chinese vocabulary maybe. But that was what they spoke. An Old Yeniseian, Turkic, Ural-Altaic, that's what I mean, language. And this proves actually my previous thoughts on that I'm right. It says here, this model fits to all of the Iron Age Scythian groups, consistent with these groups having ancestry related to East Asians not found in the other populations. Alternatively, the Iron Age Scythian groups can also be modeled as a mix of Yamnaya and the North Siberian Ngasan. So, the Iron Age Scythians are a mix of the Yamnaya and North Siberians. That means maybe the ancient North Eurasians, when we say North Siberians. Yes. Okay, the descendants of the Iron Age Scythians, very important. Here we have a multi-dimensional scaling plot based on blah 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 suggests that the ancient Scythian populations from the eastern and western part of the Eurasian steppe are genetically closer to each other than they are from modern populations of the respective regions. What does this mean? The ancient Scythian populations from the eastern and the western part of the steppe, of the Eurasian steppe, are genetically closer. That they were relatives. The eastern and western steppe herders, the Scythian populations, they were relatives. That means they were related. The Eastern Asia and Western Asia was related. Eastern parts and the western parts until Europe were related. So, again, a continuity test was performed between the two Iron Age groups. That means they took West and East Eurasian populations, and for Western Scythians, contemporary populations with high statistical support of a genealogical link are located mainly in close geographical proximity. whereas contemporary groups with high statistical support for descent from Eastern Scythians are distributed over a wider geographical range. Contemporary populations linked to Western Iron Age steppe people can be found among diverse ethnic groups in the Caucasus, Russia, and Central Asia. That means they took modern groups now and they took their DNA samples, they compared them to the old Scythian samples, and they found the DNA in the Caucasus, in Russia, and Central Asia. Yeah, so this means, I mean, it says here, when you say Central Asia, it doesn't mean Iran. Central Asia is Turkic. Okay, I can understand when you say Indo-European speaking groups, they mean today's Europe, most probably the Caucasus and Russia. But Central Asia is not Iranian. Central Asia is Turkic. Only except Tajikistan. I mean, in Central Asia, they speak 80% Turkic languages. How can you say Iranian? I mean, when you make a generalization, please, okay, you're dealing with facts here. You're dealing with a paper and with genetical data, etc., etc. So Iran is different from Central Asia. Populations with genetic similarities to Eastern Scythian groups are found mostly exclusively among Turkic language speakers. Okay, so in Eastern Scythian groups, we have Turkic DNA. That means in Turks, you can find the Eastern Scythian DNA. That's what it means. Okay, now the phenotypes. When we look at the phenotypes, it says here, derived alleles of pigmentation markers that are under selection of Europeans are present in Eastern and Western Scythians, including individuals who are homozygous for the derived alleles at selected SNPs. I don't understand this part. At the 2 LCT loci associated with lactase persistence, the derived allele is observed only in heterozygous, only in the Eastern Scythian samples, and at low frequency. The ancestral alleles at blah 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 are nearly fixed in the Scythian dataset, as they are in modern Europeans. Okay, most probably some genetic features are given here. It says here, which confer some resistance to alcoholism are under selection in East Asians. We observe the derived allele in the EDAR gene in a single Pazaric individual. The EDAR-derived allele, which is related to tooth and hair morphology, is selected at high frequency in modern East Asians and very rare in modern Europeans. So some features were found most probably in East Asians that were not present in modern Europeans. Although it has been observed in prehistoric hunter-gatherers from Sweden. That's interesting. Thus, that means if it was present in modern East Asians and if it was not present in modern Europeans, but if it was present in prehistoric hunter-gatherers from Sweden, that means ancient East Asians and ancient Swedes were related. Thus, the results of the examination of phenotypic phenotypic SNPs that show frequency differences between Europe and East Asia are consistent with gene flow across the steppe territory. So, but there is a reality that Europe and East Asia is genetically related. Okay, so the discussion here. Our results show that the Iron Age groups, long believed to be connected through shared cultural artifacts associated with the classical Scythians of the North Pontic region, also share a genetic connection. That means the classical Scythians in the North Pontic steppe, they share a genetic connection. With what? With whom? Let's see what they try to say here. This is supported by the analysis revealing population continuity over the first millennium BCE in the Eastern Scythians and low F values between Eastern and Western Scythian groups. However, ABC analysis that evaluated different models of the origins of the Scythian populations provided the strongest support for a multi-regional origin, with Eastern and Western groups arising independently with their own regions. Okay, they claimed that they rose independently. Some other papers, they claim that they rose dependently. I mean, they were in contact and they rose parallel. That's what other papers claim. Despite separate origins and an enormous geographic separation, demographic modeling infers ongoing and substantial gene flow between the Eastern and Western groups. So there was a gene flow between Eastern and Western groups. Of course, the paper says the gene flow was from the East to the West, not vice versa. It spread from the East to the West, which provides a plausible demographic mechanism to explain F values and the general uniformity of the material culture of Scythians right across the Eurasian steppe zone. So, our genomic analysis reveal that Our genomic analysis revealed that Western and Eastern steppe inhabitants possess East Eurasian ancestry to varying degrees. So when we look at the West steppe and the East steppe, they have East Eurasian DNA. And in our admixture analysis, we found an East Asian ancestry component in all Iron Age samples that has not been detected in preceding Bronze Age populations in either Western or Eastern parts of the Eurasian steppe. What does this mean? There is a component, an East Asian component, in the Iron Age samples, and it has not been detected in Bronze Age populations. That means it wasn't present in the Bronze Age populations. Did I understand it right? That has not been detected in preceding. Okay, it was not seen before. Yes, only later. Okay, so in the eastern and western parts of the Eurasian steppe. Another ancestral component is that maximized in the North Siberian Yangasan population becomes visible in the 2nd millennium BCE onwards in the eastern steppe. Okunovo, Karasuk, Mezovskaya. Most probably the East Eurasian the East Eurasian component, he was, what does it mean he was? It came later, most probably. Another ancestral component is that maximized and the North Siberian young population becomes visible on the eastern steppe. This component appears later in all the Iron Age populations, to higher levels the eastern steppe zone than in the west. The findings are consistent with appearance of East Eurasian mitochondrial lineages in the Western Scythians during the Bronze Age. So there was a certain East Eurasian component in the Western Scythians. That's reality. And they imply gene flow or migration from the Eurasian steppe. Carrying East Asian. This part is important. North Siberian ancestry from the east to the west. That means in the Western Scythians, during the Iron Age, the Western Scythians had East Asian DNA and Northern Siberian DNA. That means the ancient North Eurasians' DNA was in the West Eurasians, the Western Scythians. So, the ancient North Eurasians are actually the descendants of the West Eurasians, the East Eurasians, some Europeans, the Yamnaya, the American Indians. We see it here. Okay. And here it gives other examples here from the east to the west. Okay, so this DNA was seen from the east to the west. In general, gene flow between Eastern and Western Eurasia seems to have been more intense during the Iron Age than in modern times. So it was more present in the Iron Age times, in the Scythian times. Okay, and here we have it. In the Iron Age, the populations, they were highly mobile, semi-nomadic horse-riding groups. So the Kazakhs were the finders of the horse riders. In the East, we find a balanced mixture of mitochondrial lineages found today, predominantly in West Eurasians, including a significant proportion of prehistoric hunter-gatherer lineages, and lineages that are at high frequency in modern Central and East Asians, already in the earliest Iron Age individuals dating to the 9th to 7th century BCE. So here it means that we find in the East mitochondrial lineages. So this is a mixture of gene flow in West Eurasians. If it says prehistoric hunter-gatherer lineages, this means the ancient North Eurasians. In West Eurasians, we find ancient North Eurasian DNA. And lineages, we find lineages that are highly frequent in modern Central and East Asians. So they are also found in Central Asians and East Asians. Yes. Okay. Now there are some examples given here. In Mongolia, they were found. In the Tarim Basin, they were found. So they were all ancient North Eurasians in Kazakhstan and in Krasnoyarsk. So this means there was an admixture between the West and the East Eurasian populations. Before the first millennium BCE, they had been admixing, they had been in contact and marrying among each other for thousands of years. And I have recently found out that these ancient North Eurasians, they had been intermixing for tens of thousands of years. That's what Edward Weider said. So here I will turn again to Yamnaya. It says here, Yamnaya is genetically indistinguishable from the Afanasyevo culture and the peoples from the Altai-Sayan region. So as the Altai-Sayan region is not Indo-European, the Afanasyevo is not Indo-European, and the Yamnaya is not Indo-European. They are all, most probably, the descendants of the ancient North Eurasians culture. That's what I think. This further implies that carriers of the Yamnaya culture migrated not only into Europe but also eastwards, carrying West Eurasian genes. It can be possible, yes, that the Yamnaya traveled eastwards. But actually they came from the east. They must have traveled further west. That's what I think. If they came from the east, they must have traveled towards Europe and towards Anatolia, forming Western Asia, the populations of West Asia, most probably. And part of the Russians, most probably. And potentially also Indo-European languages. No, the old Yeniseic languages. What we call the Indo-European languages is not Indo-European in itself. It is the old Yeniseian branch of the Nadene Caucasoid languages, the ancient language. That is fact. So, and most probably later Semitic languages mixed with the Indo-European languages, because there was a flow from Africa and the Middle East to the west of Asia, and this was most probably okay. It gave actually a wrong name to the language family, because we see now that the roots of Indo-European lie in Old Yeniseian and Ural-Altaic language families. That's why there are so many Turkish or Turkic related words in Indo-European. And of course in Iranian. It's not vice versa. They are actually, they haven't taken anything from, no. Turks didn't take names from Old Persian. Old Persian resembles Turkish more than now modern Persian. So, this further implies that carriers of the Yamnaya culture migrated not only into Europe but also eastward, carrying West Eurasian genes and potentially also Indo-European languages, etc. I disagree with this part, as I said. They must have traveled westwards, not eastwards. All of these observations provide evidence that the prevalent genetic pattern does not simply follow an isolation by distance model, but involves significant gene flow over large distances. I know why the people add that they traveled not westwards but eastwards, because they want to prove the Maria Gimbuta's theory. But Maria Gimbuta's theory is wrong. It doesn't fit with the actual facts. Oh God, this is only half the part that I have already. So I think I have to stop in 15 minutes and make it 1.5 hours, and I will have a second part. So all Iron Age individuals investigated in the study show genomic evidence for Caucasus hunter-gatherer and Eastern European hunter-gatherer ancestry. Yes, that's true. So Eastern European, the Proto-Bulgars, the Avars, this is a fact. This is consistent with the idea that the blend of EHG and Caucasian elements in carriers of the Yamnaya culture was formed on the European steppe and exported into Central Asia and Siberia. No, vice versa. The Yamnaya came from Central Siberia. Yes. The Yamnaya, logically, if you claim one thing, you cannot contradict with yourself. If the Yamnaya were from Central Asia and Siberia, one part, because the language fits with the Caucasian family and Nadene from the American Indians. So if they came into Europe from the steppe, they must have gone further Europe, further west. So they must have gone to Eastern Europe as well. Okay. So all of our analysis support the hypothesis that the genetic composition of the Scythians can best be described as a mixture of Yamnaya-related ancestry and East Asian North Siberian elements. Yes, that's right. So because Yamnaya is Siberian. They didn't come from the Caucasus. They came from Siberia. They were already in the Caucasus. The Caucasus people, they are the descendants of the American Indians, most probably, the ancient Yenisei people, the ancient Siberians, most probably the ancient North Eurasians. And these people, they lived in Siberia. So they cannot derive, they cannot come out of the Caucasus. Because there is a language fact. How come that the language of the ancient American Indians and the Turkic people and the old Yeniseic family have something in common with the Caucasian family? You first have to answer this question logically. After that, you can continue. And it says here it had North Siberian elements. If the Yamnaya had North Siberian elements. They cannot be Indo-European. Because the Caucasus had Siberian elements in it regarding the language, the old Yeniseian language. Thank you, Mr. Waida. Concerning the legacy of Iron Age nomads, we find that modern human populations with a close genetic relationship of the Scythian groups are predominantly located in close geographic proximity to the sampled burial sites, suggesting a degree of population continuity through historical times. Contemporary descendants of Western Scythian groups are found among various groups in the Caucasus and Central Asia. You see here, if the descendants of Western Scythian groups are found in the Caucasus and Central Asia and the Caucasus was once together. And there are similarities to the Eastern Scythians, and they can be found in the Turkic-speaking communities. Okay, I mean, I can accept that, but they are actually not nomadic groups, they are pastoralists. This was stated by Edward Waida. Okay, from the Kupchak branch of the Turkic languages, it says here, the genealogical link between the Eastern Scythians and the Turkic language speakers require further investigation. No, you don't have to investigate them. The Eastern Scythians and the Turkic language speakers, they had a common language because Turks were pastoralists. The Scythians were also pastoralists. And the old Yeniseians, they were hunter-gatherers. And the ones dealing